Samira Ahmed was a devoted wife, a loving mother, and the pride of her community, until the shocking truth emerged that she had been having a secret affair with her own stepfather, Nadeem Khan. What began as a hidden relationship driven by lies and manipulation spiraled into a cold-blooded murder that left one man dead, two families destroyed, and a community reeling from betrayal. In the quiet, leafy suburbs of Leicester, England, life for Samira Ahmed seemed picture-perfect to anyone on the outside. At just 29 years old, she had everything most people would dream of: a loving husband, two beautiful children, and a cozy three-bedroom semi-detached home. Her husband, Imran, was known as a hard-working man who ran a successful car repair garage in the city. He was soft-spoken, dependable, and religiously devoted. Their children, a boy and a girl, went to a local Islamic school, and on weekends, the family was often seen together at the mosque or visiting relatives. To friends and neighbors, the Ahmeds were a model Muslim family. Warm, polite, and tightly knit. Samira, born and raised in the UK to Pakistani immigrant parents, was admired in her community. She had a reputation for being well-mannered and respectful, always dressed modestly, and often volunteering during community events. She had completed her studies in business administration, but chose to work part-time as a receptionist at a dental clinic so she could spend more time raising her children. Those who knew her often described her as quiet but kind, someone who put family above all else. But underneath her composed exterior, Samira was living a life she couldn't share with anyone. Over time, Samira began to feel trapped. Her marriage, once full of promise, had grown stale. Imran was responsible and gentle, but emotionally distant. He left early in the mornings and came home late, often tired and preoccupied with work. While he provided financially and treated her with respect, their emotional connection had slowly faded. Conversations had become routine, moments of intimacy rare, and laughter a thing of the past. Samira, still young and full of restless energy, found herself sinking into a quiet kind of despair, the kind that builds slowly and unnoticed until it becomes unbearable. It was around this time that she started staying out later than usual. She told Imran she was taking extra shifts to help cover household expenses, and he didn't question her. He was grateful for her help and believed she was simply being responsible. But those long hours weren't spent at the clinic. Samira had started visiting someone who should have been entirely off limits. Her stepfather, Nadeem Khan. Nadeem had married Samira's widowed mother nearly a decade earlier. He was older, in his early 50s, but maintained a confident, almost magnetic presence. He was the kind of man who always seemed in control, sharp dresser, articulate speaker, always with a firm handshake and a knowing smile. He had taken over much of the family's affairs after marrying into it, managing finances, making decisions, and presenting himself as a pillar of strength. For years, he had been a respected figure in the family and community, but some quietly questioned his intentions. Whispers about his past circulated, rumors of shady business deals, financial issues, and a short temper behind closed doors. Still, no one ever dared confront him. The closeness between Samira and Nadeem didn't begin all at once. At first, it was innocent enough. Conversations over tea, casual messages about her mother's health or family events. But slowly boundaries blurred. Compliments slipped in, then emotional confessions, and eventually something deeper formed. Samira began to feel seen again, something she hadn't felt in years. Nadeem told her she was beautiful, smart, misunderstood. In return, she confided in him her loneliness, her feelings of being neglected, and the weight of responsibilities crushing her. He listened intently, and she mistook his attention for love. Their affair began in secret. They would meet at motels on the outskirts of town or during the hours Samira claimed she was working late. Each meeting drew her deeper into a web of guilt, fear, and addiction. She hated herself for betraying her husband and mother, but she couldn't stop. The danger of it, the secrecy, and the thrill created a storm of emotions that she mistook for passion. Nadeem, on the other hand, knew exactly what he was doing. He fed her fantasies, encouraged her rebellion, and subtly planted the idea that Imran was standing in the way of her happiness. By the time Samira realized how far things had gone, it was already too late. She was no longer just a wife or mother. She had become someone else entirely, someone capable of betraying everything she once held sacred. Her life was no longer her own. It was tangled up in lies, desire, and the looming shadow of a man who had crossed every boundary. The image she maintained for the world was still intact, but behind the smiles and polite greetings was a crumbling truth waiting to explode. And when it did, no one would be prepared for what was about to unfold. Nadeem Khan had always been a complicated man. When he entered Samira's life, he did so wearing the mask of a devoted husband to her mother and a responsible stepfather to her and her siblings. He came into the family after Samira's biological father died suddenly from a heart attack. At the time, her mother was vulnerable, struggling emotionally and financially. Nadeem seemed like a savior, stepping in with confidence and promises of stability. He was 15 years older than her mother, but that only seemed to add to his perceived maturity and reliability. For a while, everything appeared to go well. He managed the household with an authoritative hand, paid off some of the family's debts, and helped Samira's younger brother find work. But Nadim's control was subtle and firm. Over time, he distanced Samira's mother from her extended family and discouraged her from working. He insisted it was for her own good, that a woman's place was in the home. Slowly, without realizing it, the family became dependent on him. Samira had always been observant, and even as a teenager, she noticed how Nadim never liked being questioned. Any resistance was met with silence, mood swings, or calculated kindness. He knew how to manipulate emotions without ever raising his voice. Years passed, and Samira got married to Imran, settled into her own home, and started a family. Her visits to her mother's house became less frequent. But Nadim was always present, sometimes helpful, sometimes overly curious. He asked questions about her marriage that felt too personal, made comments that lingered in her mind. It started with compliments, how she kept herself so well, how graceful she looked after having 2 kids. At first, she brushed it off, thinking he was just trying to be friendly. But his words stayed with her longer than they should have. It wasn't until her mother fell ill in late 2023 that things began to shift dramatically. Her mother was diagnosed with a severe kidney infection and was hospitalized for several weeks. During that time, Samira visited often, and naturally, she saw Nadim more than she had in years. He was always around making tea, offering to drive her home, listening to her vent about the pressures of motherhood and her struggling marriage. Samira, emotionally drained and tired, found comfort in his attention. He made her feel heard, and slowly she began confiding in him. Nadim skillfully played the role of the concerned father figure, but his intentions were far from innocent. He knew exactly what he was doing, using Samira's emotional vulnerability to tighten his grip on her. Their conversations grew more personal, and then more intimate. He would touch her shoulder a second too long or look at her in a way that made her heart race and her stomach turn. She knew it was wrong, deeply wrong. But a part of her felt alive again, and she clung to that feeling like a lifeline. By the time her mother returned home from the hospital, the emotional boundary between Samira and Nadim had already been crossed. What followed wasn't sudden, it was a gradual descent. Late-night messages turned into flirtation. A meeting in a quiet cafe outside the city led to a stolen kiss in the backseat of his car. And before long, they were having a full-blown affair, carefully hidden from the eyes of family and community. They used cheap motels under fake names. Samira made excuses at work, and Nadim claimed to be running errands. They both knew how dangerous it was, how devastating it would be if they were discovered. But the risk only seemed to fuel their obsession. Nadim convinced Samira that what they had was real, that they were victims of unhappy marriages, bound by culture and obligation. He painted himself as a misunderstood man, stuck in a loveless union, and told Samira that she was the only person who truly saw him. She believed him. By early 2024, they began to fantasize about a life together, away from their current lives, away from judgment. Nadim even suggested leaving the country, maybe starting fresh in Dubai or Turkey. Samira was hesitant at first, but the idea of escaping the web of lies and guilt was tempting. She started withdrawing from Imran emotionally. Arguments at home became more frequent, and she avoided intimacy with her husband. She began to resent the life she had once loved, seeing it now as a prison built on expectations and appearances. But as their relationship grew more intense, so did the obstacles. Money, secrecy, the risk of exposure. Everything became harder to manage. The pressure began to mount, and soon their conversations shifted from fantasy to planning. And when the subject of Imran came up, not just as a problem, but as an obstacle to be removed, something dark began to take shape between them. A line was about to be crossed that would change everything. By the beginning of March 2024, the affair between Samira and Nadim had evolved into something far more sinister than either had anticipated. What had started as stolen moments and whispered lies now took on a life of its own, heavy, consuming, and dangerously out of control. The excitement had long since been replaced by anxiety, paranoia, and a creeping sense of desperation. Samira's once orderly life was now built on a foundation of deceit, and every day brought the threat of exposure. Samira was constantly looking over her shoulder. Her husband Imran had grown increasingly suspicious over the past few months. He had begun to notice small but telling signs. Samira's frequent absences, her sudden reluctance to answer phone calls near him, and her growing emotional distance. Once a couple that shared everything, now even casual conversation had become tense and cautious. Imran, never one to raise his voice, took a more quiet approach. He started tracking her habits, checking her phone bills, and even noting the mileage on their car when she claimed to be working late. He didn't have concrete proof yet, but something felt undeniably wrong. At the same time, Nadim was facing pressure of his own. His financial situation was rapidly deteriorating. A failed investment had drained most of his savings, and several creditors were now calling him daily. Unknown to Samira, Nadim had taken out loans under different aliases to keep his image afloat and maintain appearances. The charming, well-dressed man everyone thought they knew was living on borrowed time and borrowed money. The walls were closing in, and he needed a way out fast. For both Samira and Nadim, Imran had become the central obstacle. He was the reason they couldn't be together publicly, the reason they had to keep hiding, lying, and sneaking around. But what had once been a silent wish, that he would somehow just disappear, began turning into a serious discussion. They didn't arrive at the idea overnight, but gradually, as they grew more entangled and more desperate, the idea took shape. Not an accident, not a divorce, something permanent, something final. It was Nadim who first floated the idea with careful wording, testing Samira's reaction. She was horrified at first. Murder wasn't something she had ever imagined herself capable of. But the more they talked, the more he wore her down with arguments, half-truths, and manipulation. He told her she deserved freedom, that her children deserved a better life, that Imran was already miserable and they were just speeding up the inevitable. He assured her that they could make it look like a robbery, something random and tragic. No one would suspect her. No one would ever know. As the plan formed, so did the logistics. Samira would use her knowledge of Imran's routines to create the perfect opportunity. They chose the night of April 12, when the children would be staying at her sister's house for a school holiday sleepover. She would prepare Imran's usual cup of tea after dinner and lace it with crushed sleeping pills, which she had stolen from her mother's medicine cabinet weeks earlier. Once Imran was unconscious, Nadim would enter through the back door, which Samira would leave unlocked. He would stage a robbery, overturn drawers, scattered valuables, a broken window, and then smother Imran with a pillow. Quiet, clean, and untraceable. In the days leading up to the plan, Samira was visibly anxious. Her behavior became erratic. She snapped at coworkers, forgot appointments, and spent hours staring blankly at her phone. Guilt gnawed at her. But she was too far in to back out. Nadim kept reassuring her, calming her down, reminding her that this was their only chance at freedom. He painted a vivid picture of their life afterward. A new country, new names, starting over without fear. Samira clung to that fantasy with trembling hands. Meanwhile, Imran had begun to quietly investigate. He installed a location tracking app on Samira's phone and took screenshots of suspicious messages she had accidentally left open. The final confirmation came when he followed her one afternoon and saw her meeting a man in a car parked outside a rundown motel. He couldn't see the man clearly, but he recognized the jacket. The walk, it was Nadim. His world shattered in an instant. Still, he didn't confront her. Instead, he called a lawyer and began preparing to take custody of the children. But before he could act, April 12 arrived. Samira moved through the day like a ghost, numb and robotic. She followed the plan precisely. Put the children in a taxi to her sister's house, served dinner to Imran, and stirred the crushed pills into his tea. As he grew drowsy, she forced herself to stay calm. She texted Nadim one word: ready. What neither of them knew was that Imran, growing suspicious of her every move, had set up a small hidden camera in their bedroom just days earlier. It recorded everything that followed, and it would soon unravel the perfect crime they thought they had planned so carefully. The early morning hours of April 13, 2024, began with flashing blue lights and hushed whispers outside the Ahmed residence. Samira had called emergency services just after 2:00 a.m. Her voice trembling as she claimed a break-in had occurred and her husband wasn't breathing. Paramedics arrived within minutes, followed closely by local police. Imran Ahmed was found lying motionless on the bedroom floor, his skin pale, his chest still. There were no signs of life. Despite attempts at resuscitation, he was declared dead at the scene. At first glance, the scene appeared consistent with a burglary. The bedroom had been ransacked, drawers pulled open, and clothes thrown around. A jewelry box was emptied. A window at the back of the house was shattered, and a few £100 were missing from a drawer. Samira, dressed in her nightgown, appeared shaken and confused. She told officers she had fallen asleep early and woke up to the sound of broken glass. She said she found Imran unresponsive and immediately called for help. The officers noted her tears, her trembling hands, and the clear signs of panic. It seemed like a tragic but random home invasion, at least at first. However, the lead detective on the case, DS Rachel Warner, had a gut feeling that something didn't add up. There were details in the scene that didn't fit. The broken window at the back had glass scattered outside, not inside, suggesting it had been broken from within. There were no muddy footprints on the carpets or signs of forced entry at any door. Even more strange, the family dog, a protective Labrador named Rafi, had not barked or shown any signs of distress, something neighbors immediately pointed out was unusual. The autopsy results arrived within 48 hours, and with them came the first major turning point. Imran hadn't died from blunt force trauma, stabbing, or any physical assault. Toxicology revealed a high concentration of a powerful sedative in his system, enough to render an adult unconscious within minutes. While the official cause of death was asphyxiation, the presence of sedatives raised immediate questions. How had he been drugged? Who had access to him? And why? Investigators returned to the Ahmed home and collected every item that might hold evidence. Among them was the half-empty cup of tea still sitting on the bedside table. Lab tests confirmed it was laced with the same sedative found in Imran's blood. This discovery shifted the entire tone of the investigation. The burglary was now believed to be staged, the scene manipulated to distract from the real motive of murder. Detectives began reviewing CCTV footage from the neighborhood. One camera located at a neighbor's garage across the alley captured a hooded figure entering the property through the side gate around 1:25 a.m. The figure's face wasn't visible, but their build, posture, and gait were familiar to someone in the investigation. When the footage was enhanced, investigators recognized the person almost immediately. It was Nadim Khan. His presence at the house in the middle of the night, just minutes before Imran's death, raised immediate suspicion. Investigators pulled Nadim's phone records and cross-checked them with Samira's. Dozens of late-night calls and texts revealed a deeper connection. A forensic search of Samira's device turned up deleted messages that had been recovered from backups. Some messages included veiled references to the plan, and one, dated April 5, read, "Once he's out of the picture, we can finally breathe." The final piece of evidence came from a device Imran had quietly installed in the days before his death. Hidden between books on a bedroom shelf, the small camera recorded audio and video of the room. The footage on April 12 showed Samira preparing the tea in the kitchen, taking a bottle of pills from her handbag, crushing them, and stirring them into the mug. It also captured Nadim entering the home in the early hours and slipping into the bedroom. With the evidence stacking against them, police arrested both Samira and Nadim within a week of the murder. Their reactions were starkly different. Samira broke down in tears during questioning, repeatedly claiming she was pressured, manipulated, and emotionally broken. Nadim, on the other hand, remained stone-faced and silent, refusing to answer most questions. Forensic analysis found Imran's DNA on the pillow used to smother him, and Nadim's fingerprints on the mug and bedroom door. The case was no longer a mystery. The affair, the motive, the method, it was all laid bare. But even as the truth came to light, the shock rippled far beyond the crime scene. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was cultural, familial, and communal. A mother lost a daughter and a husband, children lost both parents, a community lost trust. The secret life Samira had tried so hard to hide had not only destroyed her world, it had taken an innocent man's life in the most brutal way imaginable. The trial began in August 2024, drawing national attention and sending shockwaves through the tight-knit Muslim community in Leicester and beyond. News headlines painted a picture almost too shocking to believe. An affair between a woman and her stepfather, a murder staged as a robbery, and a family torn apart by betrayal. In court, the mood was tense, heavy with grief and disbelief. Every seat in the public gallery was filled, reporters lined the corridors. Family members sat with silent, tear-streaked faces, trying to understand how things had come to this. Samira Ahmed appeared in court wearing a simple black headscarf and a long, modest dress. Her eyes were downcast, her face pale and tired. She hardly looked at anyone, especially not her mother, who sat stiffly in the front row of the gallery, her expression frozen in a state of disbelief. Nadim Khan, in stark contrast, walked in with the same controlled, confident demeanor he was known for. Dressed neatly in a gray suit, he remained stoic, avoiding eye contact with everyone, including Samira. The prosecution presented a devastating timeline of events. They laid out the emotional and physical affair between Samira and Nadim, supported by recovered messages, surveillance footage, and witness statements. Forensic experts detailed the sedatives found in Imran's body and in the tea mug by his bedside. The hidden camera footage from the bedroom left little room for doubt. It clearly showed Samira preparing the drugged drink and later revealed Nadim entering the home in the early hours of the morning, moments before Imran's death. Testimony from police officers, forensic technicians, and even Samira's co-workers painted a picture of a woman leading a double life. Devoted wife and mother by day, secret lover and co-conspirator by night. Prosecutors described how Nadim had manipulated Samira, using her vulnerability and marital dissatisfaction to draw her into a toxic, illegal, and ultimately deadly relationship. They argued that both were equally responsible for Imran's death, regardless of who physically smothered him. The defense attempted to shift the blame primarily onto Nadim, painting him as the mastermind and manipulator. Samira's lawyers argued that she had been emotionally coerced, that years of subtle grooming had broken her down until she could no longer distinguish between right and wrong. They claimed she acted under psychological pressure, not out of malice. But the jury wasn't convinced. The evidence, meticulously collected and overwhelmingly damning, told a different story. After 3 weeks of testimony and deliberations, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. Both Samira and Nadim were found guilty of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice. In December 2024, they were sentenced at Leicester Crown Court. Nadim received life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called him calculated, cold, and deeply dangerous, condemning his betrayal of the family he was meant to protect. Samira was sentenced to 28 years in prison, with a chance of parole after 20. The judge acknowledged the emotional manipulation she endured but made it clear that her actions were her own. The aftermath of the trial left a trail of devastation no sentence could undo. Samira's children, now orphaned in every sense of the word, were placed in the custody of her younger sister. They were too young to fully grasp the magnitude of what had happened, but they knew their father was gone and their mother wasn't coming home. As they grew older, they would come to understand the full horror of the truth. Samira's mother, once the silent pillar of the family, withdrew from public life completely. Friends said she rarely left the house. She was caught between grief for her late husband, shame over her daughter's actions, and revulsion for the man she had once trusted enough to marry. She gave no interviews, made no public statements, and asked to be left alone by the media. The community was shaken to its core. In a culture where family honor, loyalty, and trust are deeply valued, the betrayal cut deep. Mosque leaders held sermons on accountability and forgiveness, while local support groups quietly tried to help the grieving families on both sides. People who once greeted Samira with warmth now whispered her name with discomfort, sadness, or anger. In time, the story faded from the headlines, replaced by newer scandals and fresher tragedies. But for those who lived through it, those who lost a father, a son, a friend, the pain never truly went away. It lived in the silences at family gatherings, in the empty seat at Eid dinners, and in the questions that would never be fully answered. Samira and Nadim now lie behind bars, their lives forever marked by their choices. What they saw as an escape turned into a prison of their own making. And for everyone left behind, the murder of Imran Ahmed was more than a crime. It was a shattering of trust, the destruction of a family, and a reminder that even the most carefully hidden secrets eventually rise to the surface.